savings go down the drain with no way of protecting it, even if you never worked a day in your life for Enron. And you can't find the basic necessities of life at any price. It's a pretty dire situation. Now, Oregon isn't on the verge of an Argentine-style collapse. It took Argentina more than 50 years to get into the current situation. We've only been working at it for the last 20 or so. But the basic process of taking resources from a mass of taxpayers by force in order to use the power of government to buy privileges for special interests via programs that hurt most Oregonians for the political benefit of those who seek power above all is precisely what Oregon's budget debate is all about. What Oregon risks, if current trends continue, becoming an economic third world in terms of our place in the U.S. economy. But don't believe me, believe the numbers. We already have the highest rate of unemployment in the country, especially in Oregon's rural areas, which we've just finished visiting. So now our elected representatives, the governor and the legislature, have come up with several plans that purport to address the so-called budget shortfall that's had everyone around here in a tizzy for the last 6 months. The governor's plan calls for peanut buttering around approximately $230 million worth of cuts that are actually only spending growth reductions across a wide variety of programs. Not one single program has been cut from the state's spending plan in this process. Not one. To fulfill the remaining $500 million or so shortfall, the governor proposes to tax smokers even more heavily, do the same to anyone who drinks, which is most adults and far too many children, double biennial taxes on folks who drive cars, and dedicate all state-sponsored gambling profits above $600 million, assuming there are any, to education. I guess the governor wants all unemployed Oregonians to send their kids to school so mom and dad can walk to their neighborhood bar to sip orange juice, eat sunflower seeds, and play video poker, instead of looking for a non-existent job. But these are all pretty run-of-the-mill, petty thievery ideas by the standards of taxaholics everywhere. Our governor has gone even further in his efforts to make Oregon an economic basket case. He wants to override the will of the people by making most middle-class Oregonians pay double income taxes on their Oregon tax bill. And he wants to make it even more difficult for Oregonians to sell their homes by imposing a 1% surcharge on sales of all homes valued above $100,000. Last year in Portland, all but 1,867 homes out of 27,062 homes sold were valued above $100,000. This is not a penalizing the few idea. The governor and the Democrats may have the lead on coming up with dumb tax ideas, but the Republicans have some dumb ideas of their own. By agreeing to the bipartisan plan, Republicans have shown their willingness to participate in what New Yorkers would call a shell game. They want to decapitalize the Common School Fund and vastly increase the liabilities of all Oregonians by issuing general revenue bonds against future taxes. They're just robbing Peter to pay Paul in order to rob Peter in the future. Republicans haven't suggested eliminating a single program either. Libertarians have a better way. If you're a libertarian, you believe that the money you earn and the property you own is yours. You believe that you should only have to give up your money or your property in exchange for things that have value to you voluntarily, not because some person or institution takes it away from you by force. You believe that a contract is a contract, and you believe that people are basically good and that they owe a duty to their community to be voluntarily charitable and to help those less fortunate than themselves. We've been taking that message all over the state of Oregon in the last few weeks. You know what? Every single voter agrees strongly with these principles. When we ask those same voters if they think that taxes should be raised and the state's financial liabilities increased in order to spend more on government programs, they said a resounding absolutely not. So that's why I'm standing here today, at the culmination of the Libertarian Party's No New Taxes tour. My message is simple. We don't need new taxes under any circumstances. If we want to be viable economically in the future, we should be talking about tax reductions, not increases. New taxes in the midst of the worst recession in the last decade are an especially bad idea. And the worst idea of all is to impose a set of highly regressive taxes on the poorest Oregonians who can least afford it, and to severely penalize the middle class and entrepreneurs who are the only hope we've got for future growth in this state. The Libertarian Party has one message for incumbent legislatures in this election year. We have ballot access in your district. If you vote for new taxes, any kind of new taxes, overt, hidden, or otherwise, you will very likely face a Libertarian opponent in your next race. And even if our candidate doesn't win, we can at least spoil the race for you. And we can make you spend more money defending yourself against a Libertarian opponent than you otherwise would have. We aren't going away. In fact, we're getting stronger with every passing year. You ignore us and what we stand for at your personal political peril. I'll take questions in a moment. First, let's hear from Richard Burke, who was our man on the front lines during the No New Taxes tour. Richard, come on down.
Thank you, Mitch. The Libertarian Party has embarked on a statewide media tour which has covered the last 3 weeks. Over here you have a map of Oregon, and this shows you the various places where we've had interviews with radio stations, TV stations, and newspapers. And I've learned something that's very important to this discussion that I don't think has been covered. And that is, as bad as the recession has been for people in the Willamette Valley, it is much, much worse for those in eastern Oregon and southern Oregon. In a lot of those communities, we have double-digit unemployment, we have rampant poverty, we have vacant buildings on Main Street. There are some serious problems in this part of the state. And even reporters I have spoken with in the past who've expressed more politically liberal proclivities say, you know, not now. This is not the time to raise taxes. The people in these communities are struggling. And with due respect to Governor Kitzhaber, who's a person I personally like, I just agree with him on policy, these taxes that he has proposed fall disproportionately on them. And that doesn't seem fair to us. We are told that the Democratic Party is typically the party that looks out for the poor guy. But in this particular case, with these particular proposals, that certainly isn't the case. And we're trying to defend them by raising objections to these particular tax increases. Those which affect the middle class, the real estate transfer tax and the repeal of Ballot Measure 88, you know, hurts the middle class, but that is the backbone of our economy that often provide jobs for poor people in this state. And we don't want to do anything to weaken them. We're not trying to start class warfare. What we're trying to do is point out reasons why these taxes are a bad idea, particularly at this time. Now, I want to elaborate a little bit on the spoiler issue. Libertarians typically poll anywhere from 5 to 20% in state legislative races. It depends on a variety of circumstances, who the candidates are, what the district is. But we have found that this is enough to determine who wins the election. What makes the Libertarians unique in this situation is we can poll from the right or the left. If we want to pull votes from a Democrat, we recruit a candidate in a district who cares about the death with dignity law, medicinal marijuana law, and other issues, pro-choice, for example, that appeal to the left. If we want to pull votes from a Republican, we recruit a candidate who cares deeply about lower taxes, less regulation, property rights, and gun rights. So we're trying to sort of help both parties toe the line on what they think they're going to do. When I worked for Senator George, I got this little toy. It's an elephant, little dancing elephant. And the joke around the office was that many Republicans, not all, they campaign proudly, but when it comes time to vote on taxes, they sometimes do a little collapse. And so one of the purposes of this tour is to create phone calls and create pressure so that the Republicans will stay true to the fiscal conservatism that they say they stand for. Now is where the rubber hits the road. This is where they get to prove where they stand. And the same applies to the Democrats. I don't have a dancing donkey to show you, but this is the chance for them to show that they're not trying to hurt poor people. And so this has been the purpose of this tour, to say, look, even if we take all of this money out in so-called cuts, which are just cuts and increase, we're still hiking the all-funds budget by $4 billion. Borrowing isn't the answer. That's something that Kitzhaber has said that we agree with. I have this paper here that shows all of the proposed borrowing and future payments due, not including interest, comes to $1.168 billion. The bipartisan agreement is trying to tell us this isn't a tax increase, but we got to pay for this somehow. and that's just going to be deferred taxes. And as far as the increase goes, if you want to talk general fund numbers, if you figure in population, inflation, you're still talking about a $500 million increase after adjusting for these figures. If schools don't have enough money, which is an arguable point itself, there's enough that can be transferred over without raising taxes. How about privatizing the OLCC? That's one of the things that we've had in our press kit. There's a ballot initiative going around which would privatize the OLCC and eliminate a lot of state overhead. Bev Stein, a Democrat, has just come out in support of this particular idea. Republicans should be jumping on board. Now, that's not a lot of money. That's only a few tens of millions of dollars after you've sold the warehouse. But that's just one thing. And that brings me to the materials in our press kit. In April, we stood here with Senator George and Senator Miller and Don, and we pointed out the budget that was being discussed, and we said, look, these spending rates are not sustainable. Everybody knew the dot-com bubble was about to burst. It was in the air. Everybody knew that we were, looking at a possible recession. But many legislators just fell under the cover of denial because of the many interests and constituencies that have represented themselves in this building. Well, it happened, and now here we are. And so we have reintroduced our budget, which is designed simply to provide a pot of ideas. We know it cuts $3.3 billion off the 9901 budget. We know it's not politically viable as a whole, but we provided it as a bunch of ideas, and we gave it again to the Senate and House various rebudgeting committees. And we've provided those as ideas, because if you're going to say don't cut taxes, you have a responsibility to provide ideas. And the OLCC was a detailed example of one of those many ideas. So one of the last items on our No New Taxes tour, where we've covered the state pretty well, was a pledge that we have asked legislators to take. This pledge was designed by the Executive Club of Gresham and Don McIntire. And so to talk about that pledge, the progress in getting people to sign it, and related issues, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Don McIntire. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning. First of all, I should set the record straight. I'm a registered Republican, but as I say, some of my best friends are libertarians. In fact, these two fellows I'm associated with in a group that's been around for 25 years. It's called the Executive Club. We're a Jeffersonian society. In other words, our rationale is to try to help sustain the concept of limited government. And this tax pledge, the No New Tax Pledge, I wrote. I was the scrivener, but I did it at the request of some Republican legislators who were making a presentation to the group. As far as the pledge itself is concerned, we have 16 or 17 signers. They're all Republicans. And then a number of them who have had the pledge thrust in front of them. They tell us there's nothing in it they disagree with, but they can't sign it because for whatever reason, even though they agree with it completely, they just don't sign things. To which I respond, it's a good thing you weren't around at the founding of the country, because you wouldn't have signed the Declaration of Independence. Just a couple of issues that I'd like to raise because it's part of the coverage. This drive to impose a tobacco tax, I think what I read in the paper this morning, it's 50 cents a pack. The simple-minded way that the government does economic calculations probably assumes the amount of cigarettes now being sold, and oh boy, we'll get another 50 cents a pack. Well, that isn't true. That isn't the way economics work, and it's just too bad that the people that hold forth down here don't have some minimal understanding of what goes on. But during this last legislative session, somebody produced a show and tell graphic that I thought was telling. And it said because of the relative difference between the cigarette tax in Idaho and in Oregon, that if you picked up a semi-truck full of cigarettes in Idaho, paid their price, and came across the border, that truck was immediately worth nearly $500,000 more. So now just take all those cigarettes in that truck, those packs, and add another 50 cents on. You can see that you've got a model case for tax avoidance. And that's what happens. The other thing that's wrong with this cigarette tax principle is that it insulates. Let's say that it produces the right amount of revenue for the governor. It insulates the government from the vicissitudes of life. The reason the government is getting less money is because there's an economic downturn, the citizens are hurting. It's much healthier if the government hurts too. Nowhere in this discussion that I've seen, and maybe you folks have in this debate leading up to the session, has there been any talk of laying off any single government employee? I believe that's a legitimate question to ask because that is the cost of government. Now, what they want to do is take a segment of society, aim a tax at it so the government is insulated. And then, by the way, it is a tactic relying on that old principle of we won't tax you, we won't tax me, we'll tax the guy behind the tree. We twist in the wind separately. That's a divide and conquer approach to government, with all aimed at increasing the size of government because it benefits the government class. The governor is an absolute agent of that class. His entire rationale, I think, for being in governmental leadership has been to make sure that government employees are safeguarded and to hell with the rest of society. That's what I think. I can't really assign his own motives, but that's what I think, and that's what it appears to me. So that's what we're doing. We think there's absolutely no reason to increase taxes. If the private sector slumps, the government should slump along with it. And by the way, there are so many examples of waste in government that this little reduction can be done really painlessly. Otherwise, we inflict pain on the citizen and their economy and their future economic well-being. So that's my presentation.
Let's stay up here, Don. Any questions?
We were clear and concise, and they got
Covered the range, huh?
Signers of the pledge, how many in the House and how many?
I think that I've got 4 senators. Jason Atkinson, Randy Miller,
Steve Harper,
Steve Harper,
Senator George.
Senator George. Those are for sure. There may be some others. The House, I should have brought the list, but I can.
I have a list in my briefcase if you want me to
I
give
think
it
it's
to you
only
later, I'll
16
do
according to
that.
the article I saw.
Right.
17.
17.
Yes.
If you go to the microphone too, that would help me. just how powerful you think this threat by the Libertarians is to acting as the spoiler.
Well, this would be a long answer, or could be a long answer. But the reason I'm a registered Republican, because I think that's a practical registration to have even if you hold libertarian ideals, which I do. It is interesting to see that the libertarians are saying, folks, we can affect political change by being spoilers. I still am of the persuasion that we do have a hard two-party system. It's unrealistic to think that there is going to be a third party that would have equal weight in the legislative process. So, but believe me, I have seen libertarians spoil races because they've spoiled races of people that I was supporting. You know, grinding my teeth over it. But they make a good case. We've watched this legislature and previous ones under the control of ostensibly the Conservative Party. And the question is, we asked this rhetorically of one of our representatives, and he had no response. And he was advocating that we do certain things to make sure the Republicans held the majority. And somebody said, what's the point? you increased spending 17%, the maximum you could spend it under balanced budget rules. That's the most you could spend. That was it. So how would things be any different if the Democrats were in charge? And there isn't any really good answer to that. So maybe you need to have this kind of stick, because one of the things that happens certainly to Republicans in primaries, the people that vote for them are conservative. If they have a chance to vote for two people in a primary, the Republicans in this state, even though it's a liberal state, will often go for the more conservative of the two. If they don't have that option and there's a libertarian in the race, they say, you know what, let's go with the guy that thinks right.
Could I comment on that?
Just want to follow up. You've been
They want
around.
to get me back.
Yeah,
No,
you've
actually,
been around the
no,
process for a long time, and the governor's saying he's going to stick with his veto. These other people seem to be in their cement boots, at this point, and have said, that they're not going to go along with any tax increase. Does this look like, train wreck about to happen here on Friday?
Well, first of all, I was wondering why the legislature wanted to convene anyhow, unless they wanted to raise taxes, because the governor could have made the adjustments to make up for that shortfall without a special session. So by assembling down here, they put themselves in a position of getting slapped around a little bit as being mean, cruel, and heartless if they don't go along with the spending increase plans. One of the things that I think that will happen is that I know the majority party and some of the Democrats would like to adopt a plan that does include no new taxes, but we've heard just the other day that the Democrats now are going south. So the Republicans, if they have the votes to adopt a bill, the governor vetoes it, and then what the Democrats are hoping for is that there's some weak-willed, wobbly, squishy Republicans that will convert, and then the governor will get what he wants.
Let me speak briefly and then bring you in, Richard,
All right,
for the
all right.
details.
Here's
If
my
you look
boss.
at the last election, I can't claim credit for making sure that my Republican opponent lost. I know I hurt him in terms of fundraising in the treasurer's race. But if you look at the Attorney General's race, you'll find a very different situation. Based on the numbers, Kevin Mannix lost because of libertarians. Now, we have a plan for the upcoming election at a detailed level around the state, at the legislative level and at even lower level races, where we will specifically target anyone who violates the no new taxes rule. Richard.
Sure, thanks. Actually, at the local nonpartisan level, where funding isn't an issue, we're actually winning about 2/3 of the races we enter. I, for example, defeated an incumbent. Now I'm president of the Tualatin Valley Water District. We've got a partisan commissioner up in Yamhill County, a number of city council people, school board people. And this is our bench team for the next couple of legislative cycles. And, I'll say this. We have not before targeted specific races to spoil in one direction or another. Up till now, it's been accidental. We know the effect is there. We've just never tried to use it before. This year, we're going to do it, and this is the strategy. The Republican and Democratic primary is in May. We are having our candidate nominating convention in July. So we're going to know who the matchups are, and early polling is going to tell us what races are going to be close. And so we're going to have another press conference toward the end of summer, and we're going to have a chart of all the races. And we're going to take a pool cue, and we're going to say, we're going to send this one this way, this one that way, and this one the other way. And all we need is about 5 points to do it. And there have been many instances where we've gotten 4 points, 5 points, 6 points, all the way up to 20 points. So we think this can be very, very effective. Now, Don has said we'll probably never be equal in parity to the Republicans and Democrats. Our reply is we don't have to. If we ever rise to the point where we elect 4 or 5 state legislators in a House, we'll run the show. We'll go along with one side on civil liberties issues. We'll go along with the other side on fiscal issues to the extent that they're willing to stand up for them. And that is all we need to be. And I think that even in the limited spoiler role that we are setting for ourselves for this year, we will have a seat at the table of public discussion in the next legislative cycle because people will know that we can affect the outcome of elections. It's particularly important this year because the Senate only has a one vote GOP majority and the House has a 4-vote GOP majority in the House. So we think that we are in a situation where we could literally decide who the majority parties in the Houses are. And to those conservatives who say, well, we don't want a Democratic majority, our answer is basically, if you act like the fiscal conservatives you are, you will not have to worry about us, because fiscal conservatives will have no reason to vote for a minor party candidate if they get what they want in a major party candidate. So it's really up to them. And the same is true, with regard to Democrats for attacking the poor. Now, we are going to decide how we want this to play on a global level and an individual district level. So, I don't like to do this. I've been in politics for about 10 years in Oregon. I've run for governor in '98, and I've done a number of other things. I don't like to use these tactics, but experience has shown that unless you're able to show an impact at the ballot box, you really don't get paid attention to. And we think our message is valid, so we're doing what's necessary to have it heard and hopefully have it acted upon.
I wanted to ask you about something that seems like a bit of a contradiction. On the one hand, you have a budget here with a lot of ideas, and there are a lot of ideas out there, privatizing things, or there's lots of different ways that government can be run. But we hardly ever get to any big ideas down here. It's always just incremental little tiny things, one way or another. But on the other hand, this kind of scare the legislators into voting a certain way. Doesn't that in some ways even further limit their ability to think outside the box?
I don't think so. I have an uncle who was a superintendent for a large metropolitan school district, and he taught me very early in life that fundamental change in any large system never comes from inside. If you work from inside, you can tweak it, you can tune it a little bit, but fundamental change always comes from outside. And if what we want is fundamental change, it's got to come outside of the two-party system. Even if in the long run it causes them to reform, accept our ideas, and marginalize us, that's okay, because that's ideological victory. If we wanted power, we would be Republicans and Democrats and do what a lot of the other Republicans and Democrats do. But we're out to make fundamental change, and it might hurt in the short term based on what we do, but if it helps in the long term by interjecting change in the system, then it's worth it, because we'll all benefit in the long run.
If you look at the history of business around the world, you'll find exactly the same phenomenon of smaller, more innovative companies disrupting the incumbent companies in any marketplace. And politics is just another form of business. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. If you look around the world at parliamentary systems, I'm very familiar with the Israeli system since I work for an Israeli company these days. And the Knesset has a situation where very, very small parties, sometimes only 2 or 3 members of the parliament, are able to significantly affect policy simply by the kinds of alliances that they produce. I think it'd be very valuable for Oregon, not to mention a lot more entertaining for your readers, to have libertarians in office in the state. But as long as we're not in office, we can have an impact by whacking those folks who don't obey the rules over the head of the ballot box.
It's, we would love to be wrong. In fact, I'd like to issue this challenge to Representative Minnis and Senator Nelson. You're the heads of your caucuses, and prove us wrong. We want to be wrong. Please prove us wrong. And so, no new taxes, no new user fees, no new borrowing. We have enough money. And if it means that the legislature's in deadlock, well, then so let it be. And
You guys,
Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I would like to mention one thing, since the paragons of the press are here. A lot of this debate in the next day or two is going to revolve around that cigarette tax.
Yeah.
Now, the rationale for it I've seen in the popular media is that 66% of the people think that's okay. But you know what? It occurred to me this morning that we haven't seen what the question was. I understand now the governor is the one that commissioned the poll.
Well,
I
I don't think he commissioned it.
No.
He didn't pay for it.
No.
Who paid for it?
The unions.
The unions. Okay, well, see, that's the question. Who paid for it? Who did the poll? And what was the question, and what were the questions surrounding it? Because this morning I got a feeling is if you knew that the cigarette tax would cure cancer, would you vote yes? That's a possibility. So I hope you all look into that poll.
You did.
The questions were pretty.
I used the question.
That's why we didn't use any of the numbers.
It was a push
Well, I
poll.
used the question and then tobacco.